have to worry about that.
Well, let me ask you, we need to stop before dark here, but that's a great story. You've also, of course, been very successful as a Shetland sheepdog breeder, and you've had both. What, in your opinions, are the major differences between Collies and Shelties?
Well, I got into, while I was showing the Collies, and when I had the dog magazines, and I got Dog News, was the one I got. Like I said, the Collie and Sheltie issues were either together in December or later on separated. And while I was reading about Collies, and of course you had an education from Van Dyke and the ones that wrote those columns. And where I was out in the Tulies, there was no kennel clubs where I grew up, and there certainly wasn't any tutoring or any mentoring or handling classes, or you learned the hard way by yourself or from magazines. And so anyway, so I was following both breeds, and so I knew Sheltie's backgrounds and stuff, and I lost both Carmen. I lost Tawny in the surgery that was supposed to save her life, or possibly because she developed mammary tumors. And I said, while you're at it, go ahead and spay her, because by that time she was over almost 10 years old. Well, that was a big mistake. They lost her in the surgery. And then Carmen, her daughter, who was my biggest winning collie,
what was her name?
Rob Rowan Carmen Jones.
Okay.
And there's a story behind that too. There was a movie, Carmen Jones. Did you see it? Dorothea Dandridge and Harry Belafonte, and it was a play on the opera Carmen, only he was a prize fighter instead of a bullfighter. And so that name was out, and so I registered Tawny, sent the registration in as Carmen Jones, and I was talking to Fiddle, it'll come to me. And she said, you won't get it, because she said Billy tried for it. Didn't get it. I did. Because for one thing, I had a registered kennel name, and I think that helped, because by that, Peasant Hill wasn't registered, and at that time he didn't have Abby's kennel. And I have a feeling that's why. Also, I imagine whoever it was that processed the registration made the decision, because at that time, they had quite a few stringent rules. You know, they didn't want you to have names that infringed on somebody else's, say, copyright or what like that. And you couldn't have the names of cities or anything like that. And so, but I got Carmen Jones, and I called her Carmen, but she was killed in an accident too. So when she was 3 years old, and she had a big show record. And
she took some working group first.
Oh yes, she did. I showed her to a working group first, and she went to Canada, and with Pat Tripp, and I would get something in connection with Illustrated Standard. I took Carmen, she was just 6 months old, up to Whidbey Island show, and Emily Tharp, who was president of the CCFA and was one of the ones that I was working with, the Illustrated Standard, was the judge. But anyway, we got to the show, and we went into the building, and it was in a armory, and it had a hardwood floor with a high polish. And just ahead of me, a Dr. Beatty that lived in Walla Walla was a physician at the tuberculosis hospital there. And his English setter hit that slippery floor, and it went down like a shot, and he couldn't get it up. I mean, the dog was scared too. I mean, just like ice.
No.
Fortunately, Carmen had been used to slippery floors, not carpeted. But I knew she wouldn't be able to move out, because there was no matting like she could. So I was hunting for some rosin to put on her paws. And Pat Tripp, I went to her, she says, take Coca-Cola, still Coca-Cola, and that'll work. And then she wanted to buy Carmen, because she had the president of the Canadian Kennel Club that was hunting for a top collie. And of course, Carmen was just 6 months old. But I said no, of course. And so Carmen went best of breed, third in the group out of the 6 to 9 months puppy class under Emily Tharp. And then I started showing her, took her to California, to the California Collie Fanciers in Pleasanton, and they had a either a futurity or sweepstake. They did it all together different. They picked the 4 finalists, and then they picked one. Carmen was third futurity finalist, and she was the first one of all of them to finish. And anyway, when I sent Carmen to Canada, Pat Tripp, the one I told you that told me about the Coca-Cola, she'd been pestering me to let her take Carmen to Canada. And so but I like to show my own dog, and so, but these shows came up, and I had a litter of puppies too, a repeat breeding. And so I decided to go ahead and send her with Pat. So she was showing over in Alberta, up in Canada, the prairies. And at that time, the Canadian highway didn't go straight across. She had to come down into the States, Idaho and Washington, and back up. And so she was at a show in Spokane, going through Spokane, when I took Carmen up to her. And then when she came back, a week or so later, I met her, pick her up. Well, in the meantime, Carmen, they're like everybody knows, there are tricolors that will rust, others that don't. I mean, some of them are black clear to the skin, or they do not rust. Others in the sun they do. Unfortunately, Carmen was one because she was a sable dry breeding, and so anyway, she would. And of course, in Eastern Oregon, the sun is there, and so anyway, and she was getting ready to blow her coat, and so I took her out in the yard, and I used Noreen color rinse, which was a rinse on her coat. And so, AKC, do not listen. Anyway, so when I went up to take her up to Pat to meet her in Spokane, I knew I had to tell her, because she put some product on her and the stuff ran or did something horrible. I had to tell her, so I'm hemming and hawing around. So finally I told her. She just burst out laughing. She said, "You ought to see what we do to the poodles." So anyway, Carmen went to Canada, and she took for best of breed at the Collie specialty and 4 working group firsts. And Pat had a client that had a poodle that she had to show, so she didn't show her for best in show, or she probably would have won up there too. But anyway, yeah, they didn't have ratings in those days, in the 50s. But as near as I could figure out, Carmen was probably the top winning collie bitch that 58 in the United States and Canada both. Wow. And so, anyway, how I got with the Sheltie. So I'm lower than a snake's belly. When I lost Tawny, my dear dog, and Carmen, and within less than 2 years of each other. And Gary had been wanting to get a Sheltie, so I decided we would. So I bought Treasure. I tried to get one from Donna Brown at Brown Acres. You might have met her. Mm-hmm. Well, about the time she had one that I was interested in, she decided she wanted to keep it. Well, forget that. Mm-hmm. So Joan Howard, her husband was in the Navy, and they moved a lot, and they were stationed up here, and she had advertised a litter. They had moved back to California, and she advertised a litter in Dog News, Dog World, one of them. And so I contacted her, and of course she had met me up here, seen me show the collies, so she knew that if she sold me a dog, it wouldn't be wasted. And so I contacted her. Treasure was a singleton puppy, and I bought Treasure. She shipped her up to me when she was 3 months old. And I finished her very quickly, and she produced 3 champions for me.
And what was her name?
Rob Roven, Treasure of Jubilee, and she had a CD, and she was one of, when we had the flood and I had to give up the collies, I had 4 adult collies, 4 adult Shelties, and a litter of 4 Sheltie puppies. And I sold down to 3 Shelties, and I sold this collie through June Karenko, who had Shelties and owned Badgerton Proud Prince, who was the sire of the litter of Sheltie puppies that I had. And this gal bought 3 of my collies went to Alaska to a fellow that had dogs for me, and then this other one went back to this gal in the Midwest.
So that was the end of your collies?
That was the end. Yes, that was the end of yes, and sadly, I couldn't ever get anything back, because within less than 2 years, every one of them was gone.
What year was that?
The winter of '64 and '65, when the 100-year flood. and we had all the
flooded.
yes, all the tributaries that came in from the Cascades, the Sierras, the whole shooting match, all down the coast flooded. It was and the little Walla Walla River, which is not very big, and it did. That's a long story, but anyway, we saved the house, but the property was yeah, and so Al had gone back to school to get his teaching certificate, and he was able to get a teaching position down in the Eugene area, Pleasant Hill, so we moved.
Now tell me, when did you and Hal marry?
We got married in 1946.
1946. Yeah. He passed away just a couple of years
in
ago.
2012.
Wonderful, wonderful man.